Minister, and thanks for your presence in the chamber to address this. Just to go through a few preliminary issues that are raised in the bill, and I want to join my colleagues and welcome the fact that they're covered. I welcome the bill and the effort to address a lot of long-standing things. I have some what I would regard as constructive observations to make specifically in relation to the place of e-scooters in this piece of legislation. Welcome the insurance database provisions, long awaited, and another piece of the infrastructure that we need around that, and also looking for additional information, requiring additional information for drivers who seek to be insured on other cars. The driving instructors provisions, look, I agree with that in relation to criminal records. Take Deputy Carey's point as well, that maybe there could be some kind of out clause where someone could go before an independent committee and say, look, you know, I do have a criminal conviction, but that was 20 years ago or whatever. Is there any way that that can be overlooked? It's the only criminal conviction I have. I mean, you do know, Minister, that the problem as well is in relation to the waiting time, which I know COVID doesn't help with. But the amount of times, and I think colleagues would share this, the amount of times that not being able to do a driving test has cost young people jobs is there's too many to enumerate, and I think that is something that needs to be taken into consideration. In relation to electric bikes, Minister, look, you know my position on this. I'm really supportive of any technology and any micro-mobility innovation. And the Belgians are the leaders in this regard. We are a bit slow coming to it, but I've seen it firsthand in terms of both friends and families members who have opted for the e-bikes, that the amount of car journeys that they've managed to displace already very early in their ownership is quite considerable. But there is the issue of the cost, and it's like an awful lot of the other energy initiatives that have come from my own government. You have to have a lot of cash in the bank. A good e-bike costs about $2.5–3 grand, and in order to avail of the scheme, you have to be able to put that back in, or put that down, in order to get the rebate back. So, what the Belgians do, I've raised this with you, I've raised it with ministerial colleagues in my own party, I've raised it with Minister Donoghue in advance of the budget, so I'll raise it again in the context of next year's budget. In Belgium, they have an incentive whereby any money that an employer spends on e-bike, whether it's purchasing an e-bike for an employee, obviously that it's going to displace a car journey to work, whether it's on e-bike infrastructure such as shelters in the workplace or shower facilities, is 100% tax write-offable. Now, the cost to the state, you could actually set aside maybe a modest budget in year one, but there's no major cost to the state of doing this. And it means then that employers, the private sector would lead on this, maybe the public sector would follow, but employers would actually purchase the bike for their employees. I think that would be pretty radical. Free electric bikes for workers. Minister, what a great legacy to leave behind for you. And as I said, the Belgians lead. In fact, I remember at the Velo conference in the convention centre 2 years ago, one of the speakers who was Belgian, his company pays him so much per kilometre for using an e-bike to go to work as opposed to his car. So we're kind of in the shadows still in relation to electric bike technology. In relation to Bus Connects, just want to make this point. I met Dublin Bus out in my constituency recently, had the Deputy CEO of the NTA out a year and a half ago. Bus Connects really was a desktop exercise when it came to, say, newly developing parts of my constituency, Ballycullen, Old Court, Firhouse. Just the routes that are planned pay no attention to the developments that have taken place there, and it needs to be revisited because it's already out of date because it didn't take account of developments. Scramblers. Look, I, along with colleagues, former Deputy John Curran, in the last Dáil we led the way on this. We had a Scrambler bill, and I'm glad finally that it makes it to the floor of the House here again. We introduced our own private members bill on this, and I just want to say to the people of Tallaght, and particularly one of the previous speakers mentioned it, legislation takes time, and obviously to become law it has to be good, it has to be well teased out. So we're introducing this, and it will give Gardaí the powers to confiscate and to destroy scramblers that are being used in an antisocial manner. But I also want to say how mindful I am too that that's the stick, and there also has to be a carrot. And certainly my colleague, Minister James Brown, And there are other initiatives being taken by Justice Department to try and incentivise younger people to use these in a more pro-social manner. And that includes getting local authorities to identify places where scramblers can be used responsibly, encouraging younger people to learn how to maintain them and to learn all the safety requirements that are required around them. E-scooters. Minister, I've spoken to you privately about it. Unlike Deputy Kelly's conversation with Taoiseach yesterday, we won't be breaching what we kind of said in public, but we have had conversations about it. I introduced an e-scooter bill. I also produced a pretty significant micro-mobility document in it that I think it might have been used in Programme for Government Talks. I certainly submitted it. And it's about as comprehensive as any party could produce. Quite an emphasis on electric scooters. But I don't think you've listened. And I think there should be a standalone bill for e-scooters. And I'll explain why. I think people want... I certainly am hugely enthusiastic about them. I think they have the power to displace the car in a number of instances. I think they also hold out huge possibilities for school-going children if they're introduced the proper way. So in the UK, they introduced the shared scheme for a period of 18 months or 2 years. They didn't legalise private ownership. So I think the choice that is facing us as legislators is this. I'm really pro e-scooters. I have trialled several of them here. I've been on Segways and e-bikes, and I notice hoverboards, Minister, are included in your legislation as well. I haven't tried a hoverboard yet. But I have seen how e-scooter technology and the construct, the build, has improved exponentially over the last 3 or 4 years in the shared sphere, not in the privately owned, personally owned. I mean, I could send off to one of the internet providers, buy an e-scooter, and it won't be governed by any technology. Its speed won't be governed when it arrives here. It will be up to the police to govern that. So here's the choice that faces us as I see it. Is it a free-for-all, random type system of private personal ownership that only the Gardaí can police? Or the shared hired scheme for an initial period exclusively, not personal ownership, to let people, it should have been brought in a year and a half ago like the Brits did, because of restrictions in public transport ownership, so e-scooters took up a lot of the slack there, to the extent that police constabularies in the UK actually leased some of these to assist them in policing. So it is that choice between a free-for-all random system of private ownership where you have no standard build, there's no branding, there's no control over the purchase, there's no real control over the speed. It's the Gardaí who have to police that. You can't govern it. You know, people can get around that. There's no geo-fencing, and I'll come to that in a second. That could lead potentially to chaos, litter and nuisance on the streets, and all the negative stuff we hear about e-scooters internationally, and we ought to be learning the lessons of. Versus, so that option, versus the shared hired scheme. We started it here on bikes with City Bikes, and then it branched out, it expanded into private businesses offering it, and it's been really successful, although sometimes they can become like litter on the streets because there aren't docking stations for them. So what does the shared hired model offer us? Geofencing, that technological ability to exclude scooters from footpaths, from pedestrian zones, because they're governed by GPS. And an example I used on radio during the week, if you're going along St. Stephen's Green and you want to take your e-scooter down Grafton Street, but it is excluded because it's a pedestrian zone, your e-scooter slowly comes to a halt. You have to dismount, it just won't let you go down there. And in giving local authorities the power to regulate it, then the local authorities can map the areas they don't want e-scooters to be operable in, outside schools and supermarkets and public parks, along areas of footpaths, perhaps even some greenways, whatever, but they can exclude them technologically. And what we would get also are scooters built to a particular standard, robust, comfortable. You know, in Berlin, when they polled people who were using the e-scooter scheme, 50% of them had never got up on an e-scooter in their life. I mean, that's what we're facing here. Whereas some of the shared schemes, they actually provide tutorials, and you can't get on the e-scooter until you've taken one of these tutorials. 25 kilometres is too fast. In the UK, it was 15 miles an hour. It's about 20k. I've been on these e-scooters. 20k is perfectly fine because they're going to be competing for space in cycle lanes, on footpaths. Not illegal to cycle on footpaths here, by the way. So I think this, number one, should have been introduced last year. Secondly, it should be a separate bill, a standalone bill. Let's introduce a shared scheme, the hired scheme, let it bed in, let the public build up confidence in, because that geofencing also means that if I hire an e-scooter, I must return it to a particular spot, or I won't be allowed to hire. I'll have a black mark against me with the company that I'm hiring from. So let's use their innovations as opposed to ungoverned, unfettered technology that could cause chaos on the streets. Well, not chaos is too big a word for it, but what it could do, Minister, and I'll conclude on this, is really put people off very early the idea of electronic scooters. And they have a really exciting place, and I know we agree on that, to play in micromobility in Dublin and every town in the country. Thanks, Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.